Hi, everybody. We're going to get started here, and I'd really like to thank everybody for joining our seminar today. We're really excited to talk to everybody on a very topical discussion that we'll have going on here. So my name is Daniel Kassoon, and I'll be one of your presenters today for today's session. We're pleased to go through and have on the webinar with us one of our clients. So that is Iridia Medical, and just so folks know, I am with MNP. So Iridia Medical, they exist to enable peace of mind for organizations responding to medical emergencies. Since the emergence of COVID-19, Iridia has been actively supporting organizations operating and reopening during the pandemic. So their focus is very much on enabling companies and their leaders to responsibly conduct business operations in a way that is practical, responsible, and in alignment with the public health recommendations. So with that, I'll just go through and give a very brief intro on our presenters, who they are, and high level their credentials. So first of all, we have myself here, Dan Kassoon. Always fun to introduce yourself on these pieces here. So I'm a manager with HR Consulting Services in British Columbia for MNP. And what I do is deliver on HR services across BC and the country, and primarily focus on helping companies look at their people management strategies and what's needed within that. So if we think employee relations, engagement, compensation, performance management, and recruitment. I've been in the field for coming up to 15 years here, and people and good people management practices are very much my passion, and helping businesses navigate that, right? Because it's not black and white. There's various shades of gray to that side of it. So from my standpoint, that is very much where my passion lies. From Iridia, we have Dr. Allan Holmes. So Allan is the founder of Iridia Medical, and through the COVID-19 crisis, Allan has worked to develop and implement industry-leading guidelines and protocols that have enabled essential workers in mining, construction, silviculture, oil and gas, and first responder agencies to safely provide their services. So he continues to work closely with many branches of government, including the Office of the Public Health, officers of BC, health authorities, ministries of health, BC Centers for Disease Control, and BC Fire Commissioner as a consultant. So we're very pleased to have Dr. Holmes on the call with us here. Our third presenter is Vern Biccum. So Vern is the president of Iridia Medical. So when the H5N1 and H1N1 flu emerged, Vern was a key contributor as Iridia supported organizations bracing for the workplace impacts. So he has taken a lead role in the development of Iridia's impact mitigation guides, providing practical guidance to businesses, including restaurants, golf courses, fitness centers, film production, and catering. So Vern, very pleased to have you on the call as well. So before we jump into it here, I just want to go through a few housekeeping items for folks, just to ensure, on both sides we have a smooth presentation and session here. So one thing you'll notice on your browser, first of all, looking at the browser that you're using, this format and this platform is best served through Chrome. So if you are not using Chrome, we would suggest taking time right now to quickly go open that up, just as we go through the housekeeping and the introductions here, to get your best experience from that. And as we're going through this as well, just a couple key pieces. We will be taking questions. So you will notice there's a chat box on the right of your screen. So we'd ask that you type your questions in there. We will go through, and I will be moderating those at the end of the session. So we will go through those questions and really, I find on these types of sessions, there's so much information out there, and we will bring forward the best information we can. But the questions, that's where the rubber hits the road for you. And typically, what one person's thinking, many others are thinking as well. So please take advantage of that feature. And we'll try to address the questions as best we can from a full transparency standpoint. If we cannot, we will do our best to note that and get back to folks as well. So with that being said, I would like to go through and just give you a quick overview of our agenda, and we will turn it over here to Vern and Allan. So Iridia Medical, they will provide their presentation. Then we'll flip it over to myself with MNP, and then finally go through questions. So about 20 minutes per presentation, and then we want to leave as much time as possible at the end for questions. So Vern and Allan, if I turn it over to you, please take over here, and look forward to listen to your presentation.
Great, thanks very much, Dan. Really appreciate that introduction, and Andrew and Raina working feverishly behind the scenes. Really appreciate your support, and of course, Mike Anderson for making this all possible today. Good morning, everyone. Really appreciate you making the time to join us. Just wanted to provide a bit of a caveat that our focus today, I know there are some people from out of province, but our focus is largely on the BC context. We can speak to other contexts if desired in questions, but it'll be largely a BC sort of delivery. I'm going to kick things off, and then shortly I'll be handing it over to Dr. Holmes to carry on with the next phase of our introduction. So here we go. So as Dan had mentioned, we have experience in dealing with break management and supporting organizations in their operations. And that dates back to bird flu, it dates back to 2009 when H1N1 was our last big global pandemic. And during those experiences, albeit they were different viruses, we certainly learned a lot. Learned a lot about what businesses need in the midst of an emergency and how we can best support them. So that really kind of set us up very well for when COVID-19 emerged. We have a lot of frontline care providers working in mines and working in oil and gas, and that is a perfect environment to have an outbreak just appear out of nowhere and ravage a camp environment. And so very early days, we had a great opportunity to really sort of test our approaches and our strategies. And we've also been actively supporting first responders. So we have a provincial 811 line, which was established to provide COVID-19 support, but it was very quickly overrun. And there was a need to support first responders as they were looking to, in particular, fire and ambulance, fire and police, understand when they could return to work after attending a particular call. So with that, we really got a chance to really kind of get a sense of where things were at, and subsequently expanded into the industries that Dan had spoken about. And just for some context as to the types of things that we're involved in helping them, organizations build their plans. We're involved in reviewing any of the assets. A lot of groups have done some great work, and we're involved in helping them review that and vet it. And then also getting on and joining on sessions like these to actually engage with their team members, with their client base. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of concern, and we're there to sort of help out and do that. And also recognizing that this is a long-term scenario with COVID-19. It's a bit different than the previous ones. And so through our advisory services, we're there to really kind of help them with anything they need. So that's kind of been the experience to date. And the goal today is really to share some of the things that we've learned in this process in the hopes that it adds value to yourselves, your organizations, and prospectively to your client base. So the very first thing, one of the most important things that we always advocate our clients do is establish a vision for their plan. And it may sound a little bit odd in the sense that obviously you want to return to normal and you want to open the business, and we understand that. But more importantly, you got to start thinking about your stakeholder groups, your staff, and really stepping into their experience and understanding what their concerns are and thinking about what their reality is and what their experiences are, and then looking at your clients, looking at your community. Those are also stakeholders. You may even have an investor group that you need to think about. How is everybody feeling about your operation in COVID and your intentionality behind that? And that's the word we use a lot, is intentionality. The steps represent the fact that we advocate strongly for, if you can, to open in a spot so that you can adjust and you can change based on what you're seeing happen. As people are understanding the strategy that you've got in play, you can adjust on the fly depending on what's happening geographically or what you're seeing from amongst your team. And lastly, on the vision side of things is you're in this very unique spot where you've got the public health office providing orders that you're looking to follow along with and adhere to. And then you may have industrial guidelines specific to your industry that are being produced by WorkSafe. And you need to think about, as you're going to reopen, that WorkSafe inspector coming to site. Sometimes that ushers in a little bit of fear and intrepidation as they show up and they want to see what's going on. And you need to just kind of think about how it is that you can make that visit as painless and easy for them as well, and so that it's a win-win for everybody involved. So those are some key aspects of the vision piece that we like to advocate for. Now, this is where we're going to spend the bulk of the few minutes that I have with you, and this is really what we're talking about here with a safe workplace. Is we're talking about a strategy. You've got a vision for what you want to achieve, stakeholders involved, your phased approach, and understanding WorkSafe. But really now it's thinking about, okay, what's the strategy that's going to get you to that vision? And having a vision is really, really important. It's probably the biggest thing that we see missing out there, is that a lot of organizations have a loose collection of policies or protocols, but you just quickly ask some of their staff, hey, why is this happening this way, or why is that happening? And the answers aren't great. Or you see inconsistencies in how they're doing things, and you understand that they haven't had it anchored. So having the strategy allows you to take all of those initiatives and put them into a particular area or a category, if you will. It also aids in you being able to just communicate it to all of your stakeholder groups. So, team and community, this is how we're doing it. And it just shows a real intentionality behind the approach. You're not just slapping together a bunch of different things. And it also helps on the decision making. As you will be faced with making decisions around things. And sometimes those decisions won't be based on science. They will be based on optics. But the strategy allows you to make those decisions very easily because you've put the thought in up front versus getting blindsided. So the strategy that we use is something that we refer to as the 5-pillar strategy. It's a very fancy name for the fact that there are 5 elements to it, and each one of these images represents those, and I'm just going to quickly touch on those in the minutes that I have remaining. So first and foremost, the gun thermometer to the headpiece speaks to what we're trying to do is we're trying to filter and screen people before they come to your workplace. What we're looking to do there, obviously, is we're trying to capture the symptomatic people. The asymptomatic people we will deal with the other mitigation measures I'll speak to. And you'll see that we have a picture of a thermometer there. A lot of organizations use it, and there's merit to it in the sense that temperature does appear about 88% of the time if you have symptoms. But there's some challenges with it. One is that you need to make sure your ambient temperature is good. This is a surface reading, and it can easily be wrong. You also have to have people queue up if you're going to do that. But most importantly, from our perspective, if temperature is used on its own, it does not teach anyone on your team about what they should be looking for in their own symptomology. So what we actually advocate for is that you have a 2-step screening where everyone self-screens at home before they come in, using the latest screening protocols, and they have changed over the course of the pandemic. BC has used different symptomologies for that screening purpose, but it's important that you keep it going and go through that. And so what we do is we advocate for a two-phased approach at home, and then once you get to work as well, and do it in sort of a toolbox type discussion, almost a round table type of scenario, where the team looks at each other in their eyes, obviously at physical distance, and they go through and they say, yes, I have not traveled recently, I've not been exposed to anybody who is a known positive case, and I am asymptomatic. And it introduces not only accountability, but just an understanding of what they're looking for in themselves. So with the asymptomatic people screened out of the workplace, then we're left with, okay, we have asymptomatic, and we do know that's reality, and we have to try to do our best with that. So the next phase, of course, is what we see everywhere is physical distancing. And these are your traditional measures of going through your business and your facilities and looking for pinch points and seeing what you can do. Reducing flow, making it unidirectional flow, maybe putting in mirrors to see around blind spots, things of that nature. And you do your best to do that. And in those very sort of rare environments where you can't honor the physical distancing for periods of time, then you can look to introduce some of the more the physical barriers and get into the PPE. We just advocate that you think about the physical distancing first before you jump into the PPE, because the personal protective equipment, masks and gloves and such, they bring in subtleties in how you wear, how you store them, and how you protect them, quite frankly. So there's subtleties to how you go about doing that, and we start with the physical piece first, and then in those rare circumstances, we can explore that and look at what that looks like. Then, of course, we have the hand washing, and everybody knows that hand washing is important, but you need to set your team up for success with that by having triggers identified. Tell them when they should be washing, when they arrive, when they go into the kitchen, before they eat, and whatever other trigger points unique to your business, and telling them how to do it. Sounds really basic, I know, but just, the whole 20 seconds and scrubbing inside and doing all the various approaches is really, really, really important. And then the enhanced cleaning, represented by the cleaning imagery there, everybody will say, yes, we're doing enhanced cleaning. But when you ask what that means, you'll see very quickly that some of the basic questions aren't answered, such as, who is going to do it? And we advocate that you engage your staff in the process, not just relegate it to your external cleaners. There's merit in having them do a secondary, but have your team engaged in the process. What is it that they're cleaning? Most people are not accustomed to going through their organization and identifying high touch points and vectors, and both of those need to be identified. Vectors is anything that more than one person will touch and that moves back and forth between people. So you need to either eliminate those vectors or identify them and then add them to a schedule, so you know who's going to clean it, what they're cleaning, when they're cleaning, and lastly, of course, how. So, Public Health Agency of Canada does have an approved list of cleaners, and effectively you're looking for high alcohol content, and or you can use bleach, but using the right ones. And then the last piece in this is really the most often forgotten piece, which is not touching your face, not touching your eyes, your nose, your mouth. It's a little awkward. You got to get used to doing a little bit of this, and you can develop a great skill set in doing that. But it's really, really important. And what you'll see is, if we go through all of this as a collective, we're doing a good job of keeping the workplace safe. We're screening out people that are symptomatic. We're keeping people apart. We're reminding people to wash their hands, keeping things clean and not touching their face. So in order for somebody then to get infected, they would have to have almost a breakdown on every one of these. That's not to suggest it can never happen, but if we're honoring these and keeping them intentional and at the forefront, it becomes a very, very safe environment in which to work. Just a couple of last points on this one is, the other element of having this strategy is your business is not an island. It's part of an ecosystem, and your team and your clients, they exist inside and outside of your business. And so the degree to which you're able to use this strategy to communicate what you're doing, it helps them, and we advocate for providing guidance in the workplace, when they're on transit, when they're outside in the community, how to keep themselves protected. The other two final points on the strategy piece is, this is the exact same strategy that works irrespective of industry, irrespective of workplace. Yes, it has to be tailored to both of those scenarios, and also is exactly the strategy that you would utilize if there was a second wave or whatever manifestation this virus takes next, because no one knows, but this is the exact same approach that we would use. So with that, I will now turn it over to Allan for the next phase.
Thanks, Vern. So again, when we start talking about the pitfalls, again, a lot of people have some very good plans in place, but what I want to do is focus on a few areas that we've come across. And one of them is around your communications. And if your employees and your guests and everybody knows what you're doing, it makes life so much easier. So having the sessions where you get together with the managers, you get together with staff, and give them an opportunity to hear from you about how you're actually going to implement those pillars, and how and give them an opportunity to bring their questions forward. We've learned that often when people harbor questions and they're not sure about it, they end up going to some less than ideal sources to get their information. So if you could be really transparent and being very upfront about your communication and doing it in different ways. Sometimes it's having a sort of a physically distanced staff meeting, or doing Zoom calls, just giving people an opportunity to hear about the areas that they're concerned about.
So really making sure you've got a good communications plan in place. Another area that we see is that just because a partner industry or somebody else is doing something, the whole keeping up with the Joneses, where, oh, well, I guess we need to shut our business down for 3 days because we've had a potential exposure because somebody else did it. Or, we need to be all wearing masks, so now we have to introduce face shields or a variety of other different measures just because somebody else has done. The big thing to recognize is that, first of all, provinces are different, so people do different things in different provinces. WorkSafe has different requirements, and also, what does the science say? And often what we find, and Vern's already kind of referred to this, is that people will do things just around optics, and we'll talk about some specific examples with that. So before you just jump into a strategy, really try to look through it, see what the science behind it is, and see what the practicalities and how it affects and changes what your business is. And that rolls into the third point, which is you can sometimes put all these measures in, and then all of a sudden you're now operating more of a hospital than you are some type of business that's out there, especially forward-facing with customers or in the tourism industry. Because the bottom line is that if you have those pillars in place, including the pre-screening and the physical distancing and everything else, your overall risk is very low in a very controlled work site and workplace. And again, what people miss out is that they somehow think, well, we're at high risk, and so we have to do all of these things, and it really takes away from that whole client experience. And so recognizing that you are actually lower risk in your workplace than people are going to the beach at Kits or going out to some other community event, the risk in your workplace, if it's controlled properly, is actually much lower. And then the next one is really about over-reliance on PPE. When we look at WorkSafe guidance, it's consider wearing masks. And really, again, when you're talking about what a close contact is, it's really about having a prolonged period of time when you're within 2 meters or 6 feet of somebody. So if you just have somebody just walking by or briefly going interacting with somebody, that's not considered to be a close contact, and you're not mandated to wear PPE. So we've seen a lot of industries have taken face coverings, whether it's a cloth mask or surgical mask, and do that above and beyond what WorkSafe and what other groups are doing in this, including some healthcare groups. And again, what we say is have a look at what your overall risk is. And if you're doing the proper pre-screening and you've got all the other measures, yes, it's okay to add the PPE, but don't feel like you're obligated to do that. So that's kind of the pitfalls that we see with this. So one of the things I wanted to share with you is, everybody's worst fear, and we've had this as a real example. But somebody posted on Facebook, "Hey, everybody, just been told I've got COVID. Stay healthy, everyone." And that's literally how you find out that you've got potentially a COVID case in your workplace or somebody that you've interacted with. And so the first thing I think we ask people to do is literally just take a deep breath and go, okay, great, this is one piece of information, now we've got to act on it. Based on, again, if you've got all your pillars in place, you're really not at risk for your business being shut down. It's very rare, unless there's a really big outbreak, that public health would ever come and issue an order to shut down. And so many of the businesses that actually decide to close are doing that on their own. They're not doing it under a public health order, because often it's a single case, and a single case does not actually is not defined as an outbreak. And so now what you do is you go, okay, we maybe have a positive case, and what you want to try to do is figure out how to confirm that. And so as a good policy is you'd really want to call that employee and make sure and check up on them and on their well-being, to make sure that they're supported, that they've got what they need for self-isolation, that they know that they don't need to come into work. And often they will tell you the story about, they've had a positive test or what the circumstances are. And again, I think it's important to just establish the credibility of any time you hear that somebody is a positive case. But the real contact tracing and the next steps is really the public health is the lead on this. They'll interview the worker, they'll find out the details about who, where, when, and how, where they were in contact, what sort of situations, and that really will now have them develop their plan about who they need to, when they do their contact tracing, who needs to be just, they need to self-monitor because maybe they were in the same area, or they need to self-isolate. And generally what they'll do is only self-isolate people, or recommend self-isolation if you've had prolonged, which is greater than 15 minutes, you've been less than 6 feet away from somebody for that greater than 15 minutes, and nobody was wearing any type of PPE. And that's while they were symptomatic or in the 48 hours before their symptoms started. So when you really look at a workplace, and it could have multiple floors and variety of different areas, there's actually very few people that would even fit into that category, especially if you're working in an environment that you've got the pillars in place with physical distancing. And so when you hear that case of the possibility of a positive case, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody needs to be quarantined or self-isolated. It doesn't mean, it really just means now it's time to do a little bit of homework and figure out, okay, where was this person, and how were they in the workplace? And often, by the time somebody finds out that they've got sick, they've been tested, they get the results back, it's often 4, 5, or 6 days since they've been back into your facility, and that's really the median time for incubation time. So if you find out that 10 days ago somebody was in your workplace that had a positive COVID case, you're really going down to a very, very small percentage of people that they've already got sick if they're going to get sick. And so again, just knowing that, again, it takes a few days for the virus to incubate. You've got public health will be guiding you with this, and generally they'll reach out to the manager or somebody in the workplace to discuss how that worker where they were in the facility. So the options that public health will do, and we've seen this already, if you're deemed low risk because nobody really had close contact, they may just ask you to send out a letter or contact the staff to just say, hey, you just need to self-monitor, continue to come to work, you've done everything you need. If it's higher risk because they're not able to really determine close contacts, then they may, in some cases, and we've seen this in the news, you'll see a notice going out to the public which says, hey, if you're in this facility between these hours on these days, self-monitor. And in very, very select cases, and this happens rarely, if somebody was sitting in a very close proximity to somebody for a prolonged period of time, they may ask those 2 or 3 people around them to self-isolate. So I think at the end of the day, if you do get a positive case, you just need to go through the process and realize that, again, it doesn't mean that you've got to shut your business down. And some of the things you're going to do is potentially around optics, because, again, if you add more people to the self-isolation list and say, well, okay, everybody who worked that day can all start being at home, public health is not saying you need to do that. And it's really about how you want to handle that. And we often don't suggest that that's the appropriate approach, because, again, the risk to the individual is very low. We talk about deep cleaning. Deep cleaning is is certainly nothing wrong with it. But again, if you're in your enhanced cleaning and you're cleaning the common touch points, there's no need to do a foaming of the whole building or any kind of excessive amount of cleaning. You can do a very targeted clean to where that person's work site was. And again, if you choose to do a mini shutdown because you want to quote unquote clear the air, you can do that for optics, but there's no evidence that beyond a very short period of time, and we'll address that around one of the questions later, but that you need to shut the building to sort of clean the air. So the bottom line is, I think it's a good idea to prepare for a scenario that you've got that. Make sure you've got a team that you can talk about this, and then work through that as a scenario. The next area I want to just touch on before we wrap this part of the conversation up is around the future. So looking forward, we're seeing testing now done, and there's a huge capacity now in the healthcare system. So people that are symptomatic can get tested, doesn't matter where they are in the province. Even in our very remote mine sites, they've set up places even in Dease Lake that you can get tested if you need to. People are talking about, is there an option for private testing? And this is a real evolving landscape. Some provinces support it and others not so much. BC public health officers not in a big support of having private people going and privately testing people, because really what we're talking about is asymptomatic people. So, okay, I want you to come to work. You got to go to a remote work site, or we just want for peace of mind to test people to make sure that they're not positive. So the real challenge is that when we've got a very low incidence of cases, especially as we do in BC, that the risk of a false positive is actually is a lot higher than the actual true positives. And the other piece is a false negative doesn't give you peace of mind. Again, because some people will have early symptoms and yet not show up on the PCR test. So again, if you're going to look at private testing, the real goal is to figure out, like, what are we doing this for? Is this for some type of safety for our employees, or is this for optics of our customers? And it needs to be thoughtfully worked through, because one of the groups that's talking a lot about this is the film industry. And one scenario said that people need to be tested 3 times a week if they're going to be in front of a camera. And so again, that's a great recommendation. However, we don't have really still a stable supply of some of the reagents and different components of the testing. And again, knowing that we're probably going to run into a significant number of false positive tests, what's the best scenario with that? The other area of testing that people are talking about is what's called antibody testing, which says, hey, I'm going to take a blood test, and have I been exposed to the virus at some point? And everybody that you talk to has been sick sometime between December and now, who 90% of them say it was one of the worst flus they've ever had. And so many of us are convinced we've already had COVID. And what will really tell is when the antibody tests come. They're here in some countries. In Canada, they're being evaluated as a research at this point. The BC CDC has not approved any for actual use in the community, because we don't really know what the results mean. We don't know that the IgG, which is the first antibody that comes up, what's the timeline on that? And then the IgM, which is, that means you potentially are going to be immune to it. There's no research right now to say that even if you have IgM, are you somehow immune? And so the concern is that you somehow get a passport or immunity passport that says, I've got my IgM, so I'm not going to be able to get COVID again. We just don't know enough about that to be able to confirm that. And then the last big area that I think everybody's wondering about is vaccines. Certainly a lot of people think it's the Holy Grail, but it's still got a long ways to go. First of all, you got to find the right vaccine to look at. Got to make sure that the vaccine is safe, and we know that there are side effects of vaccines, and we want to make sure that we're monitoring for that, and we don't misstep on that. There'll be manufacturing challenges, so that there'll be limited supplies as these come out, and they'll probably be not ready for the general public. They'll provide them to first responders and healthcare providers and those at high risk, and then setting up a whole distribution system. So it's still got a ways to go. And I think, as both Vern and I have talked about, this is really going to be something that's going to be with us for a significant amount of time. And again, looking at having those pillars in place, having a way to look at your mitigation strategy, and make sure that you're evolving this as time goes on, because over the next number of months, we're going to have a variety of different scenarios. We're in a good shape now, but as soon as we open up borders, we may be seeing a lot more cases, and we'll have to, again, continue to revisit all of these types of things. So that's from our end. What we've wanted to put forward to you, and hope that's been some useful information. And then we're be ready after Dan's presentation to answer any questions as well. So thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vern and Dr. Holmes, for running us through that. Very informative, and I think as we transition over into some of the HR implications about what this looks like from a work from home standpoint, productivity standpoint, engagement standpoint. We've all initially, when this started in March, the optimistic approach was, but this is going to be a couple weeks, right? This is going to be a few weeks, and now over the last 4 months, we've understood this is going to be around for a while, like Dr. Holmes was mentioning there. So one of the pieces as we transition over to the HR side of the presentation is, well, we need to think about this as a long-term game, right? Because COVID has fast-forwarded organizations into rethinking either how they do work. Can employees work from home? Well, we know the answer, it's yes, but what does that look like in the short, near, and long term? And really, how can we support employees so they're successful, and ultimately that our businesses are successful? So I'll be going through and just keeping those key pieces in mind as we talk about this, and really focusing on, okay, how can we be supportive? Like I had mentioned, the passion here is to support people management practices, and that's what we're going to look at through this next 15 minutes or so here. So the first piece I wanted to touch upon, so, all companies, organizations were just thrown into this at the flick of a switch. So typically, businesses like to plan, like to have an understanding of where they're going, and not doing everything on a whim, right? If you're like me, it felt just like you came in the office, there was a build up, and then boom, the landscape changed. As you can see from my background, I'm still at home. We're going on, I can't believe it's been almost 4 months now, I believe. But time kind of blurs a little bit, which we'll get into when you're working from home. So from a business standpoint, really quickly it was either shut down or adapt until more information was there. And now that businesses are reopening, we're moving into phase 3 as that comes forward. Well, what does this mean from both a short term, but a longer term approach to this, right? So one piece that we're seeing our clients work on and discussing with them, well, that vision piece that Vern had talked about earlier. Well, what's the vision for your business? What does this look like for your business, right? What business functions have changed? If we're service delivery, are we offering the full gamut that we used to? If we're storefront, have we moved to an more of an e-commerce standpoint? If our storefront's still open, what does that look like there? For if it's government at all levels or other organizations. Okay, well, how do we go and offer our services in a safe and effective manner? So the first thing we say, you need to get your own shop under order and look at your structure. Look at what are your business functions? How does your organizational structure support that? And then what roles support that, right? Right now you may have folks who are on temporary leave, or if you had to let some folks go. Well, if they're on leave, yes, the leave, temporary leave or recall for layoffs was extended to 24 weeks. But a lot of folks, they're kind of in that 16 to 24 week period relatively soon. Well, what does that look like when we bring folks back? So one of our messages to clients is you have a little bit of time to push pause here, as much as you may not want to. Getting these foundational pieces for the long term will be highly advantageous to your business, because just looking at this as a short term impact to your business, I think that's being a little short-sighted in where this will go. So there's opportunities to be strategic. Yes, there's labor or employment standards that you need to follow and guidelines, and I'm not a lawyer, so I can give a tiny bit of perspective, but it is no mean from a legal standpoint. There are plenty of fantastic employment lawyers out there. But what can we do to be strategic? How do we bring folks back? How do we set up our businesses? Right. So ensuring that role definition is there is big, because you need to be able to go to not only your customers, but to your employees, and in a very honest and transparent fashion, what does this look like? And then within that, which I won't touch too much on within here, but there's a lot of questions on, well, what does that mean from a compensation standpoint for employees? So there's still ways to go get market data. We will see in the future what it's been too short of a term to see the long-term impacts of salaries, but there are things you can currently do within your business, right? Unilaterally dropping salaries, well, that's going to run you into some, if nothing else, legal problems without agreement. But even on that front, is that the right message we want to be sending as we're all in this together and struggling through? So for us, really going through understanding your vision, what the repurpose of your business is, or if you're operating, yes, under the recommended guidelines, but your business it's been impacted, but it's still fairly business as usual. Well, again, what does that mean in short term, long term? So taking those considerations into play is very big from the high level standpoint. So one piece we wanted to spend a bit of time on was going through and discussing, okay, we now have employees working remotely. They've been at it for a relatively short period of time here, although it could feel like quite a bit longer for employees. But what can we do as businesses to support our employees, right? Because they're going to have basic security, safety needs. There's the notion of, oh, well, folks are, more so keen on keeping their jobs right now and not being unemployed, so that buys businesses a bit of time to sort through this. Sure, I mean that's one approach to it, but as we're in this for longer periods of time, businesses are going to adapt, to what this looks like and how to thrive, right? So the notion of, well, this will be over quickly, it's just a short-term adaptation. We're hearing more and more that might not be the right approach for your business or organization to take. We need to think about this as a longer term, and if we don't, if your business isn't, other organizations are, and they will mature within the environment that we're in. And so ensuring like pieces like having dedicated workspaces, it's been, like I said, 4 months or so since your employees have been working at home. Have we checked in with them and looked at, well, okay, are we set up properly? Do they have the basic tools that they need, or did we just pack up with a laptop and 4 months later we're still going with that, right? So I think putting plans in place to have those check-ins on dedicated workspaces, I know that's not feasible for all employees, given where they're living or their family state, but what can we do as employers to support that, to ensure productivity is up? We want to promote proper ergonomics, and WorkSafe BC is a great resource for that, right? Yeah, I mentioned about being flexible, and flexibility is a theme you will hear from me. Childcare, elder care commitments, flexibility around, okay, just because folks can come back to the workplace, and as you heard from Vern and Dr. Holmes there, there's ways to make this safe and to reduce the risk, right, and make this very, very safe for all involved. However, not even however, but in conjunction with that, does this make sense for our workforce? Are we looking at more of a work from home strategy from a longer term perspective, and the criteria around that, right? And there are definitely philosophies that you need to think through if that's where you're going, and principles, both on the business standpoint and from the employee standpoint, to take a look at. But we need to be flexible to what the options are, especially in the near term. As folks rationalize this, there's still a lot of fear and anxiety around this, and there's still a lot of research and knowledge we need as a population to fully understand what's going on, right? And then the final piece on that setup, okay, provide and leverage technology. So we get a lot of questions around, well, there's not a lot of money to go through and provide a lot of hardware resources to our staff, but I strongly recommend, where you can, taking a look at that, because if there's a lot of fear out there that employees are not being productive, well, have we actually equipped them with the tools that they need? HR is my background, not tech solutions, but there are ways to go around that, and there are countless technologies out there to support collaboration, to go through and support online records management, to support, time and attendance, whatever it may be. So again, taking a structured approach to that, seeing what is right for your business. There's selection processes that you can work through, that we will work through with our clients, to go through and take a look what's right for you, right? Employee records are they need to be in a secure environment. There's a lot of privacy information there. Well, where are those? How are we getting those signatures? Are there technologies we can leverage to go through and work on ensuring that's as secure as possible? Then the last couple points on this as well, you know, and I'll get to this on the next slide, but we need to increase communication with our employees. And that doesn't mean, we need to overburden folks with it. You're probably finding a bit of a cadence right now in what works for you. But we'll chat about that on the next slide of what that can mean for your business. And another piece, what we see our clients working on and going through is, well, what are some either temporary work from home policies or more permanent work from home policies? Do we need flexibility around sick time or paid sick time off right now, right? Do we need flexibility around other leaves that folks can take? Do we need flexibility around, well, we have some folks in the office, some folks working from home? Well, what if somebody's in the office working alone, right? Should we have a policy around what protocols are there, right? And by should we, I mean, my answer is yes. But what guides the business, right? There's unknowns, and how can we reduce anxiety for folks? So just to dive a little bit deeper into these pieces here, a big component is just promoting productivity and engagement. So there is a notion out there that because employees are working from home, productivity is dipping. We're out of our traditional constructs of, I can pop around the corner and just check up on folks, or I can physically see that folks are working, right? They're not on social media, they're actually at their desk from 8 to 5, being productive. Well, just because you're at your desk from 8 to 5 in an office setting or at home does not always mean you're productive. And shifting that to a home environment, I mean, the data is showing, there's a the data showing that there is not a overall productivity drop with folks working from home. As a workforce, we can handle this. And there's a Bloomberg study out there that goes against a lot of notions that I hear that employees are actually working less hours and not being as productive. It's actually the opposite. That about 40% or so of employees are actually putting in additional hours, up to, on average, like 3 extra hours a day. And is that concentrated time? Maybe not, but they are being productive, working at their computers or their workstations for additional time, because one of the difficulties here is to turn this off. My living space is 5 feet away from the door beside me. So for me, unplugging, right, it's a little bit more difficult to do at home because your home office is right there, and we have not had the constructs in place to, what does that mean from a psychological standpoint, to be right beside work, right? So diving down into a few of these, to ensure that outputs are still happening and folks are productive, you should have been defining and setting expectations previous to this. And if you haven't been, get on it now, because working from home there's some additional challenges for understanding what the outputs are, and inputs and outputs to our productivity. So spending some more time around defining the goals and the expectations, having your business, like I'd mentioned before, defined, and the roles defined, job descriptions in for employees with what their outcomes are, will go a long way in making sure you can set the standard and having folks deliver on that, right? And setting what the priorities are. This may mean, as managers and leaders, we put a little bit more time into not checking up on our employees, but just checking in with them. How are things going? Are we hitting those targets? We need to be a little bit more concrete on what we expect from employees. And that's not in a big brother way. That is to drive productivity and efficiency of the business. And what goes hand in hand with that is communicating regularly with your work team, right? So, in general, but especially within a pandemic, you want meaningful communication out to your employees. And if it's meaningful, it's very difficult to over communicate, right? So messaging from the top, from your leaders, what does this mean? What does this look like? General updates to the business. I mean, we're all in this together, and being transparent on how the business is doing, how you're going through this, and even some things that the business might not be able to answer at this point in time. That's not weakness, that builds trust. So to be able to go through and have those discussions goes a long way. And then finally, building culture also will go through and allows us just to build that sense of community, right? So the last point I wanted to put on this one, you had a workplace culture and values before, COVID hit. So we all need to take a deep breath and look at how can we come together, right? I had heard the saying, digital, it moved us to a digital divide. We're not in the workplace together, but it's more of a digital provide, right? So how can we work together? How can we access talent? How can we be innovative in looking at this? From a culture standpoint, if learning was a big piece of our culture, well, we can still do that remotely. I mean, if your inbox might be like mine, it's flooded with webinars, but a more personal approach, well, we can get our employees to go through and teach each other on what's going on. We can still have fun within the organization virtually, right? If we're working from home and even from a social distancing standpoint. And we need to be mindful of self-care of employees, because the fear that employees aren't working, that's just not true right now. So let's be proactive in our policies and our benefits and mental health offerings and say, you know what, it is okay to unplug from work. We do trust that you're getting the work done. So I'll stop it there. I want to switch over to questions. I could keep tangenting on this for quite some time, but let's move over to the questions. And some of the, my guess is some of the hiring and onboarding pieces will come out on the question side. If not, I can touch on it briefly. And if you have questions, follow up on that. But I do want to hop into the questions here because we have about just under 10 minutes left here. So I'll just hop over, just be mindful here. So just bear with me here as I transition into question mode. All right. So just moderating through our questions. So from the first question that we had coming through, and we had mentioned to talk about it earlier. So I've heard recent discussions that COVID-19 is transmitted via airborne mechanisms. Is that true? So Allan, Vern, if you want to quickly touch on that one, that will get the ball rolling here, and then we'll hop into some extra questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dan. Happy to do that. So the airborne transmission discussion is an interesting one. There's been people right from the start that have indicated that they felt as though airborne transmission was a possibility for this virus, but the predominant belief is that it is still droplet spread. There is some recent discussion around a group of scientists that have come together and suggested that there's more and more evidence for airborne. One of the challenges is getting that evidence to demonstrate that that is, in fact, the reality or not. It's not easy. An absence of evidence doesn't mean it's not happening, which has been something that kind of has muddied the waters on this topic a little bit. But I think from a business perspective and in the keeping with the conversations today, as it relates to what you're doing in a business, the protocols and the strategy that we spoke of earlier at the outset of the webinar would still hold if it had been airborne. And we would look for, if substantive evidence came forward of airborne, public health might provide some additional guiding measures that we would look to follow. But as this research evolves and as people sort of formulate the expert opinion, if you will, the strategies and the recommendations that we've advocated hold. They remain the same, and it doesn't have a present impact currently.
Fantastic. Thanks for that one. I'm just gonna skip to a question here. What would be, best process or practices when staff go to other cities within the province and, have interactions with others in the bubble? And what would the impacts there? So again, Vern, Allan, if you want to go first crack at that one, and I'll probably have a point or two to chime in after that.
Yeah, thanks. So if you're traveling within, and this doesn't matter whether you're traveling for personal, for business, or whatever, you just need to be mindful of your own ecosystem and continue to do all the things, and you have to kind of look around you and think that, you know, somebody out there could be spreading this to me. So again, being mindful of the social distancing. Physical distancing. Some people are more comfortable, and they're now starting to encourage and strongly support the wearing of masks in the public. And so getting from A to B, you just want to be mindful of how you want to travel. And so taking those measures, washing your hands before and after. If you do go into another work site and you're visiting, then you want to blend in with what their policies are. Are they doing formal screening? What are they doing to reassure you? And how can you proactively tell them that, hey, you know what, I'm okay. I've got no symptoms. I'm not exposed to anybody that I know of. I'm feeling good, and I feel like, you know, I'm okay to come to your workplace. And then how does that workplace you fit into those measures? Is there a reason that you need to be within 6 feet of somebody, even if it's a conference or whatever you're doing? Often these can be done at a distance. And so if you walk through that and you give people notice about coming and integrate with their policies, I think it can be done very seamlessly if you're traveling, whether it's from throughout Canada, really, because the principles remain the same. So I'll stop there.
Fantastic. And a follow-up piece to that, you know, with flights opening up and you know, going cross-border or wherever that might be, I would assume, Allan, that same principles apply there to flights happening. You want to make sure those processes, protocols are in place, and then when folks are coming back, that they're, you know, observing the public recommendations on, you know, quarantine for 14 days or whatever that might be. Are there any other implications, you know, as folks take flights and borders open up or cross-bordering, on what should happen there, especially if they're going for personal matters?
Yeah, again, you know, it's really about following the guidelines. If you're traveling provincially, you know, interprovincially, again, you need to understand if you're coming into Atlantic Canada, there may be some areas, you know, where you may have to self-isolate. If you're going to the Yukon, they've just, you know, they've just opened that up to BC, but not other provinces. So again, you just need to be mindful of the local regulations in there. And certainly, if you're coming from the U.S. or other countries, you're required under the Quarantine Act to self-isolate and have a plan in place for 14 days on your arrival. However, there are some businesses that need to bring very skilled workers in, and we're dealing with one right now with one of our clients that's you know, launching a new technology, and so they need these people to come in and verify it from all over the world. And so again, you want to work closely with the business, and you want to work closely with public health, and to be able to provide a plan that says, okay, if you're exempt under the Quarantine Act, then you still have to follow these same type of rules. And so being mindful again of what the regulations are, federal versus provincial, I think are key, so that you don't misstep and have your employees who really will think, well, oh, you're doing something that is a risky behavior. So thanks.
Fantastic. Another question here, you know, we have some employees who are in the office and others who are not, you know, they're working from home. How do we keep everybody inspired and connected? Well, tying back into a few of those pieces that I had mentioned before, you know, you can still go through and observe from a collaboration standpoint. If folks are at work and folks are at home, we can still have, you know, virtual meetings to ensure connection. We just need to put more thought in planning around how we keep folks connected. I mean, at the end of the day, we're social beings and social creatures. Introverts might disagree with me, but there are strategies there, right? So it's taking a collective approach to your business or organization and going through and putting in, if it's team meetings, if it's, you know, even just virtual lunches, if it's if you have a social committee or do social events, well, can we go through and start discussing about what that looks like virtually? And are we using the same platforms? You know, are we on, I'll just pick one, Microsoft Teams, or we have the same technologies at home as we do in the workforce to promote collaboration, and ensuring that folks are held to the same standard? That's one way to go through and keep folks inspired, and just very much being, like I'd mentioned, messaging from the top and from your leaders and checking in. That will go a long way. Another question here: is there a limit on how many? Is the limit 50 people, or is there a limit on how many folks can still be on one office floor? And is that 50 people? And so, Vern, Allan.
So the rules under WorkSafe is that again, a WorkSafe is exempt from those, and so the gathering, the public gathering order is for 50 people related to a public event. So WorkSite is exempt from that 50.
Okay. As we go through and take a look going into the future, you had both mentioned this is a bit of a longer term approach. Are we anticipating a second wave, or is there still more research to be done?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the basic answer to that is anybody who says emphatically that they know the answer, I think is misguided, irrespective of who they are. So there are different thoughts out there. Some of the leading infectious disease people that I follow advocate that it could play out in 3 different scenarios. One is sort of a slow burn where it sort of continues almost like a campfire, little embers here and there. One is sort of geographical movement as it goes, like if you look at the US, for example, where New York was a real hub and then it sort of drifted out into other regions. And then the big wave. Now, the big waves that have happened in historic pandemics have been associated with a big drop off. The virus almost disappears and then comes back, typically with a 6-month sort of scenario and timeline with a big resurgence. But there hasn't been any evidence of a drop off. That's not happening anywhere in the world. Even the countries that have had relative success, like New Zealand, they still have had 11 case presentations since they declared that they had 0 in country. It hasn't disappeared in a way that has presented the way previous pandemics have. So the answer is unknown. However, irrespective of how things play out, as we mentioned earlier, the approaches and the strategies that we build in place would support a second wave, a slow burn, or geographical sort of migration. So either way, it's the same principles at play.
Okay, fantastic. So how can we maintain satisfactory levels of productivity, but also improve upon them while working from home? Well, one of the pieces there that I'd mentioned before is you want to go through and shift from, okay, what are just the inputs and folks working on that. We want to take a look at results. The results folks are producing, and really having a keen understanding around that, right? Because satisfactory levels of production, that's going to mean different things for different groups and different organizations. So we need to work really hard at defining as businesses what that means. And as leaders going through being very mindful of, and it's going to be a bit more of an individualized experience for your employee groups, but what works for your work groups and what works for individuals. So we need to be mindful of coaching and what that means on an individual basis for employees. So, you know, as a people leader and a people manager, even though we're doing this virtually, the human touch goes a long way. Just sending emails is helpful, but actually checking in, having a video with folks, going through, doing their performance management that way, and not ever canceling those outright is going to help to keep folks inspired and have clear definition of where they're going. So that's one piece we would look at there, just being mindful of time here. We'll go through and just answer a couple more as we take a look at this. So from a, where is the question that I just saw there? There we go. From our TransLink isn't social distancing or requiring masks right now. What concerns, recommendations do you have about employees that have to commute on public transportation for 40 minutes or longer amongst the high touch, you know, enclosed spaces, and what the follow-up would be, what impacts would that have on the office? So Vern, Allan, if you want to go with that one, and then I can talk to some policy pieces.
Yeah, so I think it's a challenging area. What we have seen, what we know is that the current outbreaks that we're seeing in BC are not on transit. They're in nursing homes. There's in meat packing plants, and if you really look at where people are getting these illnesses, it's not on public transit. And so again, doesn't say that we're not going to have our first one, but I think again it comes down to the being mindful. And even though you're on transit, they're not packing the buses completely. This is why Bonnie Henry strongly recommends people have a face covering when they're on transit. Got to be meticulous about washing your hands before and after, and just being mindful. And we still believe that the majority of these cases are being transmitted by, again, somebody coughing and the respiratory droplets. And so, even on a bus, again, there are situations where you're generally not face to face with people at short distances, and just trying to be mindful of that, and just doing the best you can. But again, the risk isn't zero, but again, under those measures, based on going into a grocery store or some of the other places, it's probably in a similar range. And so again, just have to be people to be mindful, and again, continue to do what we do. There's no real magic around a solution for this. If you're going to move people and you're going to have people gather and they're going to go to Kitts Beach and they're going to do all these sorts of things, we have to have some level of risk that's out there. So the goal is to do your best you can and encourage people to wear a face covering.
Yeah, and from a workplace standpoint, what I would say from that on the HR front, we get a lot of questions from employers saying, well, we have employees who are, have anxiety about coming into the workplace, even though we would like them to be in the workplace because they need to ride on public transportation. So, one of the pieces we say, okay, well, do you require right now that employee to be in the workplace? We say err on the side of, empathy and humanity, or not err on the side, but be empathetic and put that human touch into it, and just err on the side with caution right now with employees, right? As everybody gets used to this, not everybody's used to wearing face coverings and all those things. So if folks can work from home, why would we, unless there's a compelling business reason, why would we be forcing them to come into the office if that leads to more anxiety, more mental health disruption, and higher levels of dissatisfaction? So we'll do 2 more questions here, and then I won't be able to get to all of these folks, but we will we can follow up with folks, and our contact information is there. Is it recommended to electrostatic disinfect the office each night?
Vern, go ahead.
No. So the nice thing about this virus is it's not particularly robust. There are sometimes efforts that are over the top, I would say, in terms of what needs to be done. If you look at the BC CDC, they have guidelines to what types of stuff you can use, and simple right dilution of bleach and water is sufficient to clean spaces. So I'd say the short answer is you don't need to do that. You just need to identify the surfaces you need to clean and do it appropriately. Make sure it's getting done. But again, it's not a super hardy virus.
Right. And then, how is self-monitoring effective if people can be asymptomatic carriers?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it speaks a little bit earlier to kind of what we had talked about with the partition on things. So you're self-monitoring, looking for the presentation of symptoms, so that if they develop, then you pull yourself out of interacting with other people in a very self-isolated fashion. And the rationale is, if you have symptoms, you are likely to be shedding more virus, and you present a greater risk of infection to other people. That's what that's all about. That's that whole screening piece I mentioned earlier. The asymptomatic folks, that's where the other mitigating measures come into place, by staying away from one another, by washing hands, by cleaning surfaces, and not touching face. So the self-monitoring isn't intended to capture asymptomatic people. They're sort of 2 buckets of things. So you self-screen to collect symptoms and move yourself out of the community. And for the others, it's the other measures that we spoke of earlier in the webinar.
Fantastic, thank you. So that's about all the time we have here for questions. I know we didn't get to all of them, and I apologize for that. We will do our best we will capture these and follow up on these questions afterwards. So, on behalf of myself, and MNP, and I know, Vern and Allan and Iridia Medical, we'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. We hope you found this informative, and please, if you have any questions or any follow-up conversations you'd like to have, reach out to us. We're here to support you, and you know, we want to make sure that we can continue to move the province forward and, you know, in a safe and mindful manner. So thank you very much, folks.
Thanks, everyone.